To bring it back to what you were saying about the Métis communities in Ontario, I worry that it's becoming a bit of a culture war issue in the same way that we see in a lot of U.S. politics, where they'll pick something sometimes that has some relevance to it, but then dumb it down to be a black and white issue of which you need to pick a side. I think that there's certainly within Canada, there is unfortunately some Métis communities, particularly quite far east, who are certainly not Métis. There's some databases online, especially in Quebec and Nova Scotia, who have no ties to our historical communities and will sell memberships for a fee, things like that. So I think that, we definitely have a job to do here in identifying which Métis communities are Métis and not Métis, for fear of us becoming the Canadian equivalent of my great-great-grandmother was a Cherokee princess, as that someone might say in the States, right? But I think, unfortunately, that is becoming a sort of a culture war issue to also, for some reason, target every Métis community in Ontario, when there certainly is a history of the Métis being in Ontario. I can't speak to every Métis community in Ontario. I haven't looked into it myself, but certainly some of them have historical basis of being there. And like you said about the Powley case, that was such a big thing that every provincial rep was on board with. And I did notice as well that is something that the MMF has targeted, is the Sault Ste. Marie community, which Powley is from, right? As you said. So I think, it's a tricky gray area that's being used in somewhat of a colonial way right now, unfortunately. So
the Métis National Council has an expert panel that's been put in place. Ironically, it was the Manitoba Métis Federation that demanded this expert panel be put in place, and they pulled themselves out of the MNC before the panel could do its work, which was to look into the legitimacy of the Métis communities in Ontario. Now that panel is going to be making its report this fall. In the meantime, the Métis Nation of Ontario has done a lot of work putting together the evidence, as it were, to that panel of the existence of the communities basically around the Great Lakes, the upper Great Lakes, not the lower ones, not Erie or Lake Ontario. We don't claim in Ontario that there are any Métis communities there. Historic Métis communities. We have people living there, there like they do in Vancouver. And we have service offices down there too. But there's no dispute, none whatsoever, about the historic Métis communities around Lake Huron, southern Lake Huron, the Georgian Bay area, and up around Sault Ste. Marie, all around Lake Superior, and up into the waterways that go up into the Hudson's Bay and Moosonee, Moose Factory. The history is indisputable, and Métis Nation of Ontario has a website now called OntarioMétisFacts.ca. A lot of this stuff has been put up there. But what I think I wanted to stress to the panel was that in 1970, when I came down here to Ontario, and I started organizing an organization in Ontario, why is it that I felt comfortable amongst the Métis people down here? And it is because I saw in the Métis people and their communities here the same thing I saw at home at Lac Saint Anne. We're people that, we do things together. We're families. We're a community. We're interconnected. We're looking after each other. We go to church together, play baseball games together. We fight together. We have language that we share. We hunt and trap and fish together. Berry picking, the same thing as what's gone on at Lac Saint Anne is the same thing that goes on here. And these aren't people that have looked into an ancestor 200-300 years or 500 years ago. These are people who are a people. So now what they've done is here in Ontario, they've gone to document, as we do in the prairies, for example. We can go to our ancestry because luckily we have the script records to go on with all those interviews that happened in 1885, interviewing our ancestors then about where they were born and when they were born 85 years before that, and who their parents were at that time. That all documentation was there, and it's also there in a thing called Liber Animarum, which is the church's book, Catholic Church book of records. Well, similar records exist here in Ontario, not the same as script, but all kinds of other documents to be able to show who were where did the ethnogenesis begin in the communities. And down here, there's a lot of misunderstanding because of the use of the term Métis. We know that term back at home, but you know what? When I was growing up, we never used that term in Lac Saint Anne. Never called ourselves Métis back then. Yeah, but not Métis. We didn't use it. It was when I was growing up. It just was not a term we used. And so Targosan means Cree half cousins. Down here in Ontario, in the language here, in the Anishinaabe language, it's Aptinishnab, half cousins in their language. Aptinishnab. It's the same thing. Everybody down here too understands the term half-breed. And when you talk to the people in the communities, the First Nations people in the communities, they say, oh yeah, we know them. We're all related to them. That's just the way it is. So these stories are now starting to be told in a way that they had never been told before, so that our people out west can understand and relate. I'm glad to see that that's happening, and I'm glad to get an opportunity on your podcast to tell people, have a look at Ontario Métis facts, and just see the kind of thing that I'm talking about. So as a people and as a nation, I mean, we came together and we coalesced. We worked like hell to fight for our rights. And that includes the Powley case all the way to the Supreme Court in 2003. We should be continuing to do that. Circumstances aren't allowing it right now, but discrimination, racism, or discrimination amongst ourselves, for example, that comes in the same way discrimination comes from anywhere else. And that's learned behavior, and it's a lack of education or understanding of facts. We have an obligation amongst ourselves not only to be bringing facts forward, but also to be opening up and being open enough to want to look at those facts and not just slam the door and say, no, I got my opinion. This is the way it is. We have work to do amongst ourselves. Reconciliation is a big word. People use that all the time. It's an important one. And it's one that I'm more focused on now than ever. Because it's through reconciliation only coming about because of meeting, dialogue, understanding, having information exchanged, and all the rest of that, that we can then reconcile our differences and then come together. That's what we need to do. That's our future. And the sooner we can do that, the sooner we're going to be able to deal with the colonial governments and the people in those governments who do not want us to get ahead. They don't want our rights recognized. They don't like the fact that the Supreme Court has said this in 2003. They can't buck it, though, because of the law, but they can buck it if they can find a reason to delay their fulfilling their obligations.
Yeah, I think hopefully what you were saying about the Métis National Council's kind of investigative community who's going to be preparing a report on the legitimacy of Ontario communities. Like, I hope that this will all come about to be a net positive thing in the end, because even like you were saying, there were some communities that that you don't claim, and I hope that at least it becomes a report that can help to address the idea of Métis colonialism, because it is something that we're seeing, that is something that I feel like is dividing us from our First Nations cousins. Like you see it in BC sometimes too, like Métis in BC trying to claim land out here when we don't have really any historical connection to it. Like in my mind, like, you know, the Métis Nation of BC is built around the idea that there's one historic Métis community that is like a sliver of like northern BC, but really, like, I think they need to stop operating as if it's about all these historic Métis communities here, and more so as it's a social group for Métis people who live in BC. I think that's really important as well, because one of the ways that I've seen kind of Métis colonialism pop up in BC as well is with the I believe it was the Trans Mountain Pipeline, because MNBC supported it a few years back. Their headlines read that the largest Indigenous group in BC supports the pipeline. Now, we might have the largest Indigenous population, but we are not Indigenous to BC. And that's how these things are used, right? So I hope that these investigations and reports end up being some sort of net positive there to identify who we are, where we're from, where we're not from, and when we have Métis leaders who are engaging in these kind of colonial tactics, right? Yeah, so one can hope. But I'll bring it back to just what we were saying about recognition, and I wanted to bring up one of who we mentioned earlier today, one of Howard Adams' concepts. I tell you, but my audience has got to be so sick of me talking about Howard Adams. I think he comes up in every episode of this show, but you know, in his book Prison of Grass, he claims that despite the appeal of peaceful reforms, these are not an option within Canada, as they will always be on the colonizers' terms, and thus never truly in favor of Indigenous people and the struggle for liberation. He goes further to state that those who control the power, the wealth, and the resources are the ones who want to negotiate, and it is always to their advantage to do so. So does any of this ring true to you? Because you've clearly had success with negotiating with the Canadian government. In your opinion, is it a viable long-term solution for the liberation of Indigenous people to continue negotiating?
Well, first of all, what Howard was saying was true in his time. But as I said before, things have drastically changed because of the Constitution Act 1982, and then a number of succeeding court cases that have put meat on the bone of what those rights are. there's, for example, there's been, as I said, a number of cases. One of those was Daniels. The federal government used to always say to us, we don't have an obligation, because under Canada's division of powers in Canada's constitution, the federal government has the responsibility for Indians and then Indians and lands reserved for Indians is the way it's worded. But because of the Supreme Court case in the 30s, Quebec took the federal government to court and won the point that the federal government also has the responsibility for the Inuit. Well, Daniels did the same thing for us. It said, federal government, you can no longer get away with the notion that you don't have any legitimate legal authority to deal with the Métis people. That was one of the things they used to use to push us off to go back, go see the province, they'd say. Well, that has ended that. That's a big change since when Howard was there, when Howard was alive. I mentioned the Constitution, and I'll say it over and over again. When that gets reinforced by Supreme Court decisions, such as Powley, which clearly state Métis have existing constitutional rights, and you have an obligation to deal with those rights, then that means they can't get away with it. Have not only a legal, they have a moral obligation. Canada tries to stand up in the world as, the greatest place in the world to live. And compared to other places, believe me, that's true. But they can't continue to do that and then continue to ignore their legal responsibilities to us. So they're going through the motions, not the motions, but the actual things they have to do, such as that Bill C-53 that I was talking about. There's another, there are a number of Supreme Court decisions that are really important to us, but one in particular is the court decision that said that if there's going to be any impact on the rights of the Indigenous peoples because of government policy or because of intrusion on their lands, or whatever may impact on their interests, the government has an obligation, or the industry has not. Well, it's the Crown that has the obligation to consult and accommodate. They can't just, so they give license to a mining company, they can't just go and say, well, we've talked to you and so on. They have to accommodate us. We have a lot of leverage. It's legal leverage that never existed before. Unfortunately, that legal leverage isn't enough in many cases, to the point where we have no choice but to bring civil disobedience into play. But the amount of that we have to do now is now limited to specific places, and in particular in British Columbia, of course. Everywhere else, the negotiations are working because we have legal hammer. So that's all I can say on that. But negotiations.
Yeah, I think I agree with you that I think that there's a place for negotiation and there is a place for civil disobedience, and I think it's a matter of us being organized as a people to decide when we want to enact each, and making sure that we have a clear identity as a nation that is separate from Canada, really, so that we can have like some sort of sense of who we are as a people and how we want to go about making sure our rights are protected, and that we can live as Métis people as we want to, and exercise rights over our land as well. I think despite the obligations that you've mentioned that the government now has to us, that it's an excellent point of leverage, but I don't know that it's something that we can rely on, because I don't really trust the morals of the government to pursue that out of goodwill so much as something that we will need to continue to leverage, and point to get what we need, if you will. Maybe let's talk about more specific movements and specific rights of our people. I wanted to bring it back to something you mentioned about your father telling you earlier that has been kind of a guiding point of your politics and your activism. When your dad told you to get our land back. So the land back movement, I think, since your father probably told you that, has erupted quite a bit. It's quite a popular slogan now. A lot of people subscribe to the land back movement. So I was wondering what that movement means to you, and what you see as a good way to achieve that. Is it a mix of lobbying and negotiation? Is it civil disobedience? Could you speak to land back a little bit?
Well, I mean, that's still the bottom line of it all. Really, unfortunately for us, our lands have been alienated. And so that's the big issue, the big problem we've got to deal with. But it can't be seen as an insurmountable one, and I'll tell you why. Federal government is already into negotiations on treaty land entitlements, for example. They're dealing with First Nations on land entitlement. There's no excuse for them not to be able to deal with us on the same basis. Governments are coming up with schemes to provide money in lieu of land so that our people can buy our own land. We're seeing all kinds of pretty rich settlements that are going to First Nations now because some of their actions that they've taken in court on resources and funds that they were supposed to have that they've lost. They're getting billions now in settlements here and there. And you can do a lot with money. If some of our lands are alienated and we want them back, they give us the means to buy them back. We'll get there. There's no question in my mind that we'll get there now because we have the hammer. We have the courts. The courts have been 100% behind us every way. All the
Yeah, and I think you hear a lot about that, about nations being given the ability to buy their land back, and I think it's like an excellent short-term solution that you get the land and it's yours the fastest way possible. But the only thing that concerns me about that sometimes is it seems to validate the overall ownership of the land, of like that the government owns it and we have to buy it from them. I feel like it doesn't establish a precedent of Indigenous land sovereignty, just giving nations a means to buy land from the government. What do you think of that?
Well, I guess alternatively, the government could buy the land and then turn it over to us. I mean, what do we want? What's the end game? We want the land. To me, let's get it. However, we're going to get it. We can't rewrite history. The the government's claimed the land. Well, hell, they bought Rupert's land for $1 million.
Yeah.
Give me a, geez, how
Mm.
crazy is that?
Yeah.
First of all, who had the right to give Rupert's land any title? Where did the king get the right to create the company of traders, the Hudson's Bay Company? They create these things out of the blue, and they do these things in complete isolation of the reality of us and the fact that they have no right. But they did it. They did it. And for me, what's important is that we have the land. That we have the land that our people want in their communities for their own purposes. We've got land for people who want to live on the land. That's what we need to achieve.
Yeah, I do agree with you. I think, or sorry, go ahead.
I've spent 50 years at this now, 55 years. I'm tired of wanting to have to argue anymore about what should have been or how they shouldn't have done. I want to see the land.
I think that's a good way to look at it. I think first and foremost, like, having land is such a powerful tool, and I think just getting our hands on that land in whatever way we can right now, and then using that as further leverage for the struggle for Indigenous liberation is the way to go, in my opinion. So, Tony, maybe I'll move us towards wrapping up here, and maybe I'll share one more of Howard Adams' concepts and see if you think it's something that's still relevant today. Now, something that Howard writes about a lot is the necessity of dismantling Canada and capitalism. He says that since first contact, it has been the goal of the colonizer to implement a capitalist system which benefits the colonizer at the expense of the colonized. Dispossessing Indigenous peoples of their land functioned as primitive accumulation, building into the colonial Canadian capitalism today that continues to oppress Indigenous people in various forms of poverty. Empowering Indigenous people is essential to maintaining order in Canada's capitalist system, and history has shown that Canada will go to great lengths to keep Indigenous people in their place. Indigenous liberation poses a great threat to the capitalist system, and thus Canada makes all attempts possible to stifle it. If true Indigenous liberation were to actually occur, it would result in the dismantling of capitalism and Canada itself, a concept that is for obvious reasons unacceptable to colonial powers. Many argue that resistance towards Canada's divide and rule tactics are essential and are only possible through the self-determination found in the intersection of Indigenous socialism and red nationalism. Does any of that ring true to you as still being relevant today?
Unfortunately, no. Or is it fortunate? I don't know. As I said at the beginning, half a century away from where Howard and I were back in the day. I mean, it's been a half a century of change. There is no way that as we're even struggling to get the minimum of recognition, that we would in any way have a chance to change Canada's political system. That's just not in the cards. And so why bother? Why don't we make capitalism work for us? We can. The federal division of powers in Canada is drastically changed with the recognition of our rights as a people and our rights to self-determination. In the end, we end up with more powers than the provinces. There's a federal division of powers between the provinces and the federal government, but Indigenous peoples have their own powers. First Nations have their treaties, and they, in some places, are able to have those treaties implemented and working in their favor in the way they want it. They've done it. In other places, they still have to work that out. With us, we need to have our treaties signed, and then we then have the full authority and the obligations that come with that authority. The obligations to maintain our values, our traditions, our ways of life, our respect for our own people, our respect for Mother Earth, and everything on Mother Earth. Those are our responsibilities, obligations that go with the powers. We have them. They have to be just put in place. Mm. Capitalism is a form of government within our own self-government, our self-governments. It's up to us to determine how are we going to govern ourselves within our own systems. What aspects of colonialism and capitalist government systems, how are we dealing with that in the ways we want to deal with it, in our own ways? These are discussions, big discussions we have to have. And we have the opportunity to have them now, because our organizations our governments are being empowered financially in a big way to have the resources to hold the meetings, to have the experts, to have the staff, to have the dialogue and all the consultation that we have to have within our own communities about all of these questions. As with the issue about land, we can't turn back history. As with the colonial system of government within Canada, we can't do anything about that. We can manage within our own systems of our governance how we want to operate, and it's got to be on the basis of our traditions, our values, our way of life, the way we want to do things.
Yeah, I hear you. For me, I don't see a way forward utilizing capitalism for our traditions or for our well-being as a people in the long term and the well-being of the planet. But I mean, that's the way that I see it, and I'm sure we could talk forever about it. I think well, maybe I'll have you on during the next season. I really appreciate you coming on today. Really appreciate all the wisdom and the knowledge you're able to share. I have immense respect for the work that you've done over the past 50 plus years, and I really appreciate you giving us your time today. Thank you so much, everyone. Elder Tony Belcourt, any final words you want to sign off with?
No, just that, in addition to being able to do maybe another podcast in the future, I hope I get a chance to sit down and talk with you, because I do want to listen to hear what you have to say, what your ideas about why capitalism can't be embraced, can't be worked, and what's the alternative. I mean, that's worth discussing. I think we need to have that discussion too within our communities. I really do appreciate having had this opportunity to do this interview with you, and I'm really much looking forward to seeing your whole series. And, I'm sure it's going to be exciting for all of us.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, we'll hopefully set up another time to chat, and fingers crossed it's in person next time. But we'll be in touch. All right. Thank you so much. Marcy, thanks for watching, everyone.